Alright, 10B. Standard 10, Substandard B. Explain efforts to redistribute land in the South among the former slaves and provide advanced education, such as Morehouse College, and describe the role of the Freedmen's Bureau. Alright, so let's look at the themes here. Political interactions. Our elements are efforts to redistribute land to the former slaves, efforts to provide advanced education to the former slaves. An example is Morehouse College we need to look at. And then we have to describe the role of the Freedmen's Bureau. So describe it. That's our chore. That's what we have to do. That's right. Alright, so here's the way I see this standard. Okay, former slaves, how during Reconstruction, how were they provided advanced education, and then how was land distributed for former slaves, or was it? And then the Freedmen's Bureau, what services did it offer, or role did it take in dealing with former slaves? And that's the way I interpret this standard. You may look at it a little differently. After the Civil War, when slaves were freed, they had nothing. And the most eloquent way that this was written was in Frederick Douglass's The Life and Time of Frederick Douglass, that he wrote himself. He said, the slave had neither money, property, nor friends. He was free from the old plantation, but he had nothing but the dusty road under his feet. He was turned loose, naked, hungry, and destitute to the open sky. Very eloquently put, the situation that African Americans were in after they were released from bondage and during Reconstruction. So to meet this need that African Americans had, or the several needs that African Americans had from being released from bondage, radical Republicans wanted to meet that with the use of the government. And they passed during Reconstruction, radical Reconstruction, we spoke about already, the Civil Rights Act, and which Johnson vetoed, and then they overrode his veto. And also the Freedmen's Bureau Act, which Johnson vetoed, and then they overrode that veto. So this act, Freedmen's Bureau Act, creates the Freedmen's Bureau. And our standards we have to learn about, or focus here, we have to learn about the role of the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau in the Act itself in 1866 was called the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. Abandoned lands meaning lands that plantation owners owned during the Civil War, and they were fighting in the war, but they left and abandoned those lands to go to other countries to get away from the United States because they had lost. They fled into Mexico and other countries. Alright, so our standards want us to look at the redistribution of land, or efforts to redistribute land to former slaves, these efforts that were made. And so if we look back at the standards, let's explain the efforts to redistribute land in the South among the former slaves. Did it actually happen on a large scale, or was there just an effort that was a failed effort? Is what we're looking at here. The first time we see any redistribution of lands was during the war, near the end of it, when Sherman placed his Special Field Order number 15 into action, in which he took 400,000 acres of land that had been confiscated from the South along the coast of the Atlantic Ocean here, and redistributed that land in 40-acre segments to relocate slave families out here that were refugees from the South. So that is one effort at doing this, but not many families actually. There were a lot actually, but there were 4 million slaves, and this probably about 40,000 slave families might have been relocated out here with this, or less. And then the Freedmen's Bureau was authorized to divide confiscated lands and abandoned lands into 40-acre plots to lease not to just give away, but to lease to freedmen, and they could buy it at a later date. And in this, the Freedmen's Bureau actually situated about 10,000 African American families or black families on about 500,000 acres of land, about 500,000 acres, abandoned by fleeing planters. And so that was a little bit of effort, but the myth going around, and it was discussed by radical Republicans, was that every slave that was freed, out of about 4 million, would receive 40 acres and a mule. And so a lot of freedmen were waiting around for their 40 acres and a mule to be disappointed. They would not get a 40 acres and a mule. And by 1877, only about 10,000 out of 4 million freed men actually received land. And most of the white population did not like this change in social status. And here's a cartoon that's put in one of the newspapers. The Freedmen's Bureau, an agency to keep the Negro in idleness, meaning not working, at the expense of the white man. Twice vetoed by the president and made a law by Congress. Support Congress and you support the Negro. Sustain the president and you protect the white man. This is the way a lot of the white people looked at it, and they did not embrace the Freedmen's Bureau, and they fought against it strongly, opposed it. It really is not effective at redistributing land, so not much land is going to be redistributed. A lot of land that was taken, some of these Freedmen's Bureau generals or officials turned their heads, taking bribes from farmer landowners who would then intimidate African Americans to give the land back to them or sell it to them. Alright, but anyway, not much land was redistributed. Alright. The role of the Freedmen's Bureau, it was created as an agency within the War Department to provide temporary relief measures for African Americans, like to provide them with food if they needed, shelter. Education was a big one, clothing, and medical care. So in giving relief to these free men, these were the things that want to try to provide for them if they couldn't provide them themselves. Alright, so the Freedmen's Bureau had several others as well. Medical care, to provide that for them. Also, any type of criminal trials in the southern part of the United States that was zoned out in those 5 military districts, the Freedmen's Bureau would supervise all the trials involving African Americans. If there was an African American defendant or victim, then the Freedmen's Bureau would be supervising those trials in court. All right, they would also supervise land titles to those abandoned lands and how they were transferred, and then they would also negotiate labor contracts between the free men and then the southern planters or landowners. And then they would oversee the courts to deal with labor disputes between these two, any disputes that occurred, the contracts between them and the disputes that occurred within court. So that was some of the roles of the Freedmen's Bureau. Alright, and here's one: provide advanced public education for former slaves. And our standards is explain or how that former slaves were provided advanced education. Morehouse College is an example, and then the role of the Freedmen's Bureau in that. So the Freedmen's Bureau was an agency set up to provide temporary relief, and one of those things was education, was to provide education for these free men. The Freedmen's Bureau had help from the American Missionary Society, which was a Protestant-based or religious church-based group that come from the North, who were abolitionists, and they were dedicated to coming down south to educating African Americans and promoting social equality and helping them get the education they need. Now, it's the American Missionary Society that actually established the Freedmen's Aid Society, which was another group that come down from the North. Southern people call these groups scalawags. The people within them, scalawags, or actually not scalawags, carpetbaggers. I'm sorry, carpetbaggers, because of a bag that you used to travel with, looked like a carpet, made out of carpet. But anyway, the Freedmen's Aid Society, financed by churches in the North, what they did was they organized a supply of teachers from the North. and then supplied them with housing down in the South so that they could teach free men, women, and children and get them educated. And so it's this group here that's going to help African Americans the most, but the Freedmen's Bureau is going to help them set up schools. Well, what the Freedmen's Bureau does not do, or did not do, it did not hire the teachers, and it did not operate the schools. So it didn't pay a salary to the teachers, and it didn't pay for the schools to be opened or operated. What did the Freedmen's Bureau do? It rented buildings that had been confiscated to the societies for schoolrooms or classrooms, and it provided books, and it provided transportation and protection for those teachers that are coming down from the north. And then it offered protections for the black students. A lot of them were adults, and some of them, most were children, and some were adults. Most of them were adults. To protect them from the opponents of black literacy, since in the South it was illegal to teach African Americans how to read and write. So the Freedmen's Bureau was to protect not only the teachers that were coming from the North and transporting them to the schools, but to also protect these black students who were going to schools there. And then to supervise over the schools, the Freedmen's Bureau would do. And that was its role in education. So the American Missionary Society set up that Freedmen's Aid Society, and what they would do is raise funds, recruit these teachers to come south, and that would operate, and then this missionary society would operate these schools. Alright, one school set up was called Morehouse College during Reconstruction. Atlanta Baptist Seminary is what it was called before. It was called Morehouse College. But Morehouse College was created and founded in 1667. It was moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and its nickname was called the Black Harvard. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went there and graduated from there. And it to educate free blacks during Reconstruction to become ministers and nurses, and to educate them to be professionals in society, and to change African Americans, to make them more literate, and to provide advanced public education for African Americans who had just been released. And that was located in Atlanta, Georgia. Here we are down here in southwest Georgia. Morehouse is in Atlanta, and it was created during Reconstruction. Okay, I think that's it. I think that was a very short one. Explain efforts to redistribute land in the South among the former slaves and provide advanced education such as Morehouse College, and describe the role of the Freedmen's Bureau. If you have any questions, please ask them in class. Good luck on the test and the EOCT.